that dirty? I don't see anything. Yeah. Hey, all you gluttons for punishment, I see you're back here again. I think you're all getting about as bad as me, which I'm okay with, to tell you the truth. So let's pull a bevel gear. So the first thing we have to do is loosen each bearing cap. So we've got 4 studs, 4 nuts, 4 fold over locks, times 2. Same setup on the other side. I couldn't have made that more perfect if I would have designed it myself. And I've already taken the time to flatten all the lock tabs off camera, but honestly, props to the last person that was in here and did this assembly. Every one of these locks is positioned just perfectly with the tab up against a hard stop, preventing any counterclockwise rotation at all. That one's perfect. That one's as it should be. That one is exactly as it should be. It's almost, I almost feel bad taking this apart because it's just so right, you know. It's, oh, anyway, I'm rambling here. Seriously, it's like taking paint thinner to a canvas. Oh. All right, I'm over it. All right, that's all of them. So what we want to do now is loosen up the bearing caps on both sides and get the shim packs out from under them. Just like we did with the bevel pinion, we want to get those shims out of there, make sure we don't damage them in any way. So we put both bearing caps back on after pulling the shims. Why is that? Well, I still need to have this bevel gear shaft supported, but I didn't put them back on fully. I left a little bit of a gap behind this one because you want a rather fair amount of in play on that shaft for what comes next. And that is pulling this left side bearing. So we have a bunch of things working against us here. Not only is it a press fit on the shaft, but it's flat up against the face of this nut. Now this nut has to come off the shaft, the lock has to come off the shaft, and the bevel gear has to be pressed off the shaft in this direction. So the only way we can get that bearing off without destroying it is to get a puller behind the inner race. And that's impossible to do with everything stacked up so tightly in there. So how do we solve that problem? My solution is sitting on the bench up there. This is the bevel gear and shaft that I pulled out of old 2115. So we have that bearing, like I said, pressed tight up against the face of this nut. So we need to get that nut loosened anyway to get the gear pulled off. So what I'm going to do is go in there and start backing this nut off. And we're going to go 1 to 2 turns because we're going to use it to start pushing on this bearing. So as we start running that nut off, it's going to drift the bearing out somewhat. Once we get, like I said, about 2 turns on it, I'll run it back in. And that should give us just enough of a gap in there to get a puller behind that bearing and slide it the rest of the way off that shaft. Sounds simple enough, right? Well, unfortunately, that brings us to our next problem. And that is, how do you hold this shaft from turning while you're trying to loosen that nut and exert enough force on it to actually start pushing on this bearing? This is a 3-inch nut, and they're typically run on in excess of several hundred pound-feet of force. So, well, again, my next solution, we're going to use the steering clutch hub. We have this nice splined end out here, and you don't want to just put a pipe wrench on those splines, but I've seen it happen. But we can just use the spline fit inside that hub to go on there and hold it. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Cat already built it for us. But we're going to need to use this too. Okay, so between the steering clutch hub, that flat piece of steel, and a few 1/2-inch bolts, we've essentially bolted that whole bevel gear shaft to the case. That thing's not going to move. We can do whatever we want to it now. So we're ready to loosen that nut. Like I said, though, that's a 3-inch nut. And the trouble is, if you put a modern wrench on there, by the time you get up to like a 3-inch wrench, the head of that thing is going to be like 1.5 inches wide, and you've only got half of that to work with. That's like 3/4 of an inch. You got that bearing right there. You have the tapered hub of the gear on the other side. That wrench isn't going to fit. So a cheap 3-inch wrench is like $200. An expensive one's like $500. And that's a little bit too much for me to buy just to grind half of the head off and then hope I don't spread it. So, well, we'll go back into the Caterpillar Service Tools book. I swear I shouldn't even buy books like this because for me it's just torment. They have a neat section here, special end wrenches. You can see the old style construction. We'll just read quickly here. These forged steel wrenches fit various nuts, bolt heads, etc. that are too large for ordinary hand tools. As some of the sizes are not readily obtainable elsewhere when urgently needed, tell me about it, it is wise to add them to your service equipment now and be prepared. Would if I could. Part numbers, size of openings, machines, and parts on which they are used are given in the following chart. Oh my God, I can just read through this stuff for hours, but we'll go over here. You see D2, R2, 22, 8C20, and PV15 tractor, bevel gear or hub retaining nut, wrench number T727, size of opening 3 1/32. That's just another example of how life just isn't fair these days. If I could just go buy those things, I'd be like, I want one of those, and I'm gonna have one of those, I'm gonna buy 2 of those, and we're just gonna basically, until the list is done, I'd do it too. But so what do? Well, we can't fit a modern wrench on there, but the old monkey wrench will work. Look at this, just like it was made for it. Well, that's what we're doing. Did I also forget to mention that it may, small chance, involve the use of a 4-foot long cheater pipe as well? Tip away. moves. Okay, the lock is loose, so we're moving things. From time to time, I'll loosen the bolts on my holding fixture, and I'll come around here and make sure I still got in play on that shaft. Good there. Reason being, you're drifting that bearing outward and taking up that in play, and you don't want to come out so far that you start binding heavily into that retainer. You'll break the ears off, so just something to be mindful of. Okay, I think I went far enough, so I'm just running the nut back to the gear. And I don't know if you can see, but we probably have, a good 1/8 of an inch right there. Plenty of room to get behind that bearing with a puller, get it the rest of the way off that shaft. So I can take the holding tools off. And then we'll take the left side bearing cap back off. And we'll pull the whole bevel shaft as far this way as we can get it. So now finally, puller is behind the bearing, and I want to point out I got my handy little stop bolt that I made back in the end of that shaft. That's probably the most handy tool I've made in a long time. There's so many different things I use that for. But we'll get that bearing work the rest of the way off of the step shoulder. There we got it. Now we can finally get the nut off there, because I like to pull the old fold over lock out of there and have it right out of my way. You could probably leave that in when you pull the bevel gear, but I don't want to have that little tab getting in the way or getting mashed on anything or potentially dinging any of those threads. So that old lock is taken out of the way, and we put the nut back on, because this bevel gear hub is a keyed tapered press fit, and we pull that with about the same amount of force that we pull these steering clutch hubs, probably even a little more. So the nut gets threaded back on just shy of the end of the hub, so that there's something to stop that gear when that taper fit, that press fit, finally releases. Okay, that'll be about right. Now we'll pull the whole thing back into the case, and once again install this bearing retainer, this housing, because I've found it's a lot easier to do the work that we're going to have to do over on the other side if this side is still being supported by something. Even though the bearing's gone, we still have that old wide lipped seal there that's going to support this shaft for as much as we're going to need. So all right, back to the right side again. Bearing cap is off, and we're finally ready to tool up to try and pull that bevel gear off the shaft. So we'll go to the bench once again. I'll show you my setup. And yeah, once again, still, I shouldn't even buy these books, because, oh man, they list all of the, look at that, the service press, the adapters, put right into that D2 case. They give you the full list of all the pieces you need. The 6F25 service press, 5F9897 sleeve, 5F9888 adapter coupling, 5F9892 pin, and the 5F9881 adapter. Where did all these tools go? I've never been able to find them. Maybe one day, but we don't have any of that fancy stuff. But I got my little OTC ram, and well, we have our 3/8x16 forcing screw for net puller that grabs onto the end of that bevel gear shaft just perfectly. We have this adapter piece I made to go in the end, sorry about that, in the end of the ram. Forcing screw goes through there. We have a nice base plate for the ram. And our sleeve, well, it's literally a sleeve. So, call me crazy, but this is a D3400 cylinder liner. That's right. One of them that's right inside there. I tell you what, when you end up tearing down 4 engine blocks to finally find a good one for a certain Caterpillar D2 build, you kind of end up with a few of these laying around. So, all right, I took one of the rustiest, nastiest ones I had, wasn't good for anything else, and I'll show you that lead-in chamfer at the bottom for the rings makes it a perfect fit on the back of that bevel gear. It fits the dish back there perfectly. It surrounds the bearing. It's plenty long enough to clear the end of the shaft, and the lower end where the liner seals are, wouldn't you know, in its original form, it's a perfect slip fit inside that floor that the bevel gear shaft is sticking out of right now. I did put this in the lathe and took about 20 thousandths off the bottom. You can see where it's so shiny. That makes it a perfect pass-through fit instead of being a slip fit that has to be perfectly aligned. Just makes it more user-friendly, but okay. It's a little redneck, I know, but that's what I use, man. Oh, that kind of looks like what's in the picture, if you squint a little bit and use your imagination. So, all right, we're ready to pull. I've got the liner up against the back of the gear. Forcing screw is run all the way into the shaft, just enough tension on it to keep the tool in line. We have the large nut just backed off the end of the hub, so when that releases from the taper, it will travel just far enough to loosen up. That nut will catch it. It will not allow anything to go exploding off the shaft. So I'm going to leave you guys over here with the camera. I'll be on the other side dialing up the pressure, hiding behind the case, likely crouching low to the floor like a man. Sounds like we got it. Shaft is out. And now the gear. And that's all it takes. Okay, everybody, there's no more gears left in that case. They're all on the bench. So I'm going to do a lot of cleaning here, and we're going to assess. And when we come back next time, we're going to talk about, what my feelings are on these. I can tell you, I'm not loving it. I've seen teeth that are a lot better, but, well, like I said, there's a lot of work. There's a lot of cleanup left to be done there. kind of like the way my liner works for a sleeve. I'll tell you what, it's got some heft to it. It's thick wall. I bet that's 5 or 6 pounds. So plenty of strength there, plenty of material. I don't even think that's the weak link of my system. So a couple more pieces left to take out of the case. Even though the gears are all gone, we're not quite done with that yet. We will address that next time as well. Thanks for watching, everybody. That's, well, how I pull a bevel gear and a shaft on a Caterpillar D2. That's kind of a lot of messing around, but that, for me, is the easiest way I found to do it. So thank you for watching. As always, I have a lot of work to do. And boy, jobs like that are hard on shop rigs, let me tell you. Hope to see you guys back again.